So we gotta share with the employees. Because without employees, we can't make a profit. And if employees make more money, they have more purchasing power. The economy functions better. But we must open up. We must. It's so crucial that small enterprise that we don't tie them up in chains and with regulations.
Today, I have the honor to speak with Frank Stronach, founder and CEO of Magna International, one of Canada and the world's great companies. Frank built that company from nothing, starting in the 1950s. It's quite a story. We discussed the keys to motivating yourself, to starting and maintaining a successful and expanding business, why that's a good thing for yourself and everybody else. The idea contained within his corporate constitution, it's an economic charter of rights which advocates for the input, autonomy, and profit sharing among all workers, management, shareholders, etc. And I'm very much looking forward to talking about it with him. Hello, Mr. Stronach. It's very, very nice to see you. We met a couple of months ago at a restaurant in Toronto, and I had the opportunity to talk to you about your business ventures over the last 5 or 6 decades, which I found extraordinarily interesting. And in the intervening period of time, I've read one of your books, the one that's more autobiographical, and I'm very interested in your story. I thought you would make a particularly good podcast guest because one of the things I do with my podcast is walk people through the lives of successful individuals, because I think it would be better if people believed that they could move forward successfully in the world and that they were equipped with some knowledge about how to do that. And I think that's something we could really concentrate on, focusing in on. I know it's very important to you. In this podcast, you came to Canada in the 1950s. We'll go through your story autobiographically. You came armed with a tiny bit of money, some actual skill, some determination, and out of that you built a massive business empire. Let's start with this. Not everyone listening and watching are going to know what Magna Enterprises is. So would you do us the favor first of laying out your business empire? Tell people what it is that you do and what you've accomplished, how you're spread out through the world, what you guys manufacture. Just lay out the story, the description of Magna.
Okay, I've always said life is a question of fate and circumstances, being at the right places at the right time with the right ingredients. As it happened, I was born in a working class family, and when I finished my schooling and I had 1 or 2 years practical experience, I wanted to see the world. I applied for a visa to South Africa, Australia, the United States, and Canada. Sometimes I'm a little tough on the Canadian bureaucracy, but I'm saying it's still the best because they came first forward with a visa. So I landed in Quebec City. I took the cheapest fare I could, from Holland on a coal freighter. And so I arrived in Quebec in, I think it was about April 1954, and the immigration officer asked me, do you know anybody in Canada? I said no. So I said, well, then you go to Montreal. So I moved so I took a train to Montreal, but I didn't know anybody. My English was reasonable okay, and there were some English-speaking people on that ship, and so I tried to practice my English. So anyway, I knew because I had $200 in my pocket, and I knew that wouldn't if I would right away board a hotel or whatever. So and room to let, just knock on the door, and you might get a room. So I did work for him an hour or two, right? I knocked on there were a few signs I've seen. I knocked on the door. I think I kind of looked a little rough from the long journey, and so they say it's already leased. But I did find the room. So the next morning I got up and I looked at the road maps. I looked at and walked around, and I worked in the factory. But it was in '54. There was a major recession. I just couldn't find a job, right? And during that time, I was hungry not because I wanted to lose weight. I was hungry. I had no money to buy food. And if you experience that, that's forever. It's burnt in your soul, right? So anyway, I ran out of money. I was hungry. I had an acquaintance, not a close friend, but somebody I know from the same town I came from, and that was in Kitchener, right? So I saved enough money I bought a Greyhound bus ticket, and I moved to Kitchener. I traveled by bus by Kitchener from Montreal. And so when I got off the main square, I asked somebody where such and such address is. They said, look, go up there 4 blocks and then ask again. So up 4 blocks, ask you, well, go up 3 more blocks and then you might have to make a left turn. So after about 2 hours of walking, I could find the house where that fella lived, and I knocked on the door, and an elderly lady said, Max, that was the fella's name, there's somebody here who wants to see me. I was it was a very happy feeling, to meet somebody which you know from previous days. So anyway, Max came down and he looked at me and said, you look a little rough. Are you hungry? I said, yes, come on in. So the next day, I slept there. The next day, we started job hunting. In the industrial site, there was nothing, but I did find a job at the Kitchener Waterloo Hospital in the kitchen. And so I felt so sorry for myself. I feel when I come to Canada, I get a manly job, cutting trees down or taking out stones, something manly. But I was there in the kitchen with a lot of elderly women, nothing against elderly women. My mother was an elderly woman. I liked her, but I felt sorry for myself too, peeling potatoes, washing salads, etc., etc. So in the evening, I was just itching to get away to be amongst people. In those days, there was an Austrian club in Kitchener, so I went there. In those days, there was slow dancing, right? A lot of music, and when I danced with a girl, what you do, where you're from. I say, I'm from Austria. What you do? Well, I work in a hospital. My hands were so smooth from washing dishes. They thought I was a surgeon. So, but towards the end, they always kind of said, no, I'm just working in the kitchen. Then I guess they didn't want to dance close. They didn't want to go out with a guy which works in the kitchen, but that's the way life is. But anyway, after a little while, after about a month or so, I did find a job in an engineering and production-oriented company. Their company worked exclusively for the Avro aircraft, right? Which Canada developed, but that project wasn't financed anymore, and it was closed. The factory, the Avro aircraft factory, I think, was closed. The company I worked for was closed, so I hitchhiked a ride from Kitchener to Oakville. Ford was building a new factory at the time. There were huge lineups. I waited for about 2-3 hours before they interviewed me, and they interviewed. Looked, yes, you're dual and die maker. You're too young to get any experiences. So I wasn't hired, and I drifted to Toronto, then I hitchhiked right to Toronto. But years later, I had many times, meeting, lunch meeting, dinner meeting with the president of Ford. And they told me, you're lucky. If I got hired at the time, I would be the president, right? So I could tease him, right? I knew him well enough that I could. But anyway, I did find a job there in a very small company, about 10 people. After a year, after a few months, the guy said, the owner said, you're doing a great job. I want you to be a partner of mine. And my chest swelled a little, and that's great. And nice guy, but he never wrote it down what it's all about. So I said to myself, there's nothing to do to run a factory. So I looked in the papers, and I found a job where I got paid a lot more. I moved in a rooming house where the toilets were in the hallway, and I saved every dollar. After a couple of years, I saved about $5,000. I rented a garage. Actually, it was the gatehouse of Standard Products in Dufferin and DuPont in Toronto. And the size was about maybe double the garage. I bought a few used machines. I had a $5,000 saved up. I guess in terms today, that would be at least 100 or 150,000, right? So I bought the used machines, and out I went hustling. I knocked on factory doors, and I said, I'm great in solving problems. And I said, look, if I can't solve the problems, you don't have to pay me. But anyway, after 1 month, I hired a worker. After a year, I had about 10 workers. After 2 years, about 20. After 5 years, about 3,000-4,000. After 10 years, about 75,000. After 20 years, 125,000. Then I built up a company with 170,000 employees in 34 different countries. So anyway, the message I want to get across is, when we're younger, we all hustle to make some monies so that we can live in dignity. I guess I could have lived in dignity in all the 34 countries, but I chose Canada. I think I've seen the world, and I met just about every president, from Clinton to Putin to Tony Blair, just about everybody. And I could see Canada perhaps the only country now which could be a role model, where we could implement an economic charter of rights. Magna basically is more than a business. It's really a culture. I call it the fair enterprise system. The basic philosophy on fair enterprise is the human charter of rights alone is not sufficient. We have to fortify it with an economic charter of rights. Economic charters of rights will lead to economic democracies, and economic democracies are the basis for democracy itself. But let me explain it a little better, because we don't talk too much about it. Those conversations are they're not plentiful, right? But let me simplify things now. All the politicians, all business, matter of fact, most people agree, if the economy doesn't work, nothing else will work. You cannot feed the hungry. You cannot look after the most fragile people, the elderly, the sick, and the handicapped. But we do not talk what drives the economy. The economy is driven by 3 forces: smart managers, hardworking employees, and investors.
He just said smart managers, hardworking employees, and investors. So write it down.
That means all three have a right to the outcome, which is profits. The message I want to get across is, if we fail, or if we do not let workers participate in profits, then we got a problem, okay? Because the world has always been dominated by the golden rule, and still is. The people which have the gold make the rules. I don't want to be dominated by anyone. If I feel that strong, then I should not be able to dominate somebody either. So thereby, the only way we be able to achieve that is via an economic charter of rights. The message I want to get across to Canadians is, the human charter of rights alone is not sufficient. We have to fortify it with an economic charter of rights. Economic charter of rights, as I said before, will lead to economic democracies. And economic democracies are the basis for democracy itself. The human charter of rights alone doesn't mean a lot of things. For a kid innocent in Detroit is free to be hungry. So the amazing story about the whole thing is, when I put in a corporate constitution at Magna, it was about in the mid-late 80s, the Constitution basically said, or the most important thing on the Constitution was, we predetermined what we do with the profits. So the Constitution said, the profit sharing said, 20% of the profits go to the shareholders, 10% goes to the employees over and above their wages, half in shares, half in cash, 6% management gets, 2% charity gets, and 7% is reinvested. The profit sharing said 20% of the profits go to the shareholders, 10% goes to the employees over and above their wages. The most important thing on the Constitution was, we predetermined what we do with the profits. So the Constitution said, the profit sharing said, 20% of the profits go to the shareholders, 10% goes to the employees over and above their wages, half in shares, half in cash, 6% management gets, 2% charity gets, and 7% is reinvested for research. So when I put the Constitution in, the profits went up the first year about 40%, the second year about 100%, the third year about 200%. When you empower employees, where they share, where there's a clear-cut concept, where they share in the profits, you release an enormous energy. You know, because they're on the front line, the employees on the front line. They can see what you have to do to make a better product for a better price. So that's what it's all about. That's the kind of that's what the world needs. You know, we stand perhaps at a crossroad. Who will dominate the world? The United States is slipping to a certain extent. The United States has dominated the world for the last 100 years, and where freedom and religious freedom, freedom to speak, and a lot of freedom, great, right? We have maybe followed it up, and we could do a little better there. But the United States, unfortunately, has a lot of problems. There's cancer in the inner cities. The poverty is enormous. I don't know if it's feasible, right? But the key question we have to ask ourselves: what can we do? Because the divide is too great. There's so much money held by just a few, and there's so much poverty by many. Okay, so what do we have to do to level that out? Not completely. You should never level it out. At the same time, I say, A country which stifles its citizens in pursuit of productivity, ingenuity, creativity is a decaying society, because you have the society or the world's made up of different minds, different desires, different. Let everybody choose their own route to happiness. Okay. So, but it's very important. So I divide actually the program. I classify business over 300 employees. It's a large business. Below 300 people, it's a small business. The law would stipulate that the large business, which have more than 300 employees, that the law would provide that workers could share in some of the profits. And that could be determined, right? It could be an escalated program. The small business basically is the backbone of any country. They pay the most taxes, they have the most employment, and this is where, call it, the new products come forward, the new technology, etc. So we must do everything we can that we take the red tapes off, take the chains of small business, and let small business operate under the pure free enterprise principles. So the bureaucracy has climbed enormously, I could never build a Magna anymore. Imagine starting out in a garage. Imagine to build 170,000 employees, over 400 factories worldwide. I could never, because I would choke under the first factory, right? And I could give you examples now how cumbersome it is, right? Okay, and when we look back 40, 50 years, yes, we have a lot of security, our safety measurement, and, buildings have to be built that they don't collapse over the snow load, etc. But the bureaucracy has climbed to such an extent. But I'd like to point out, to bring about change, you won't bring about change if you point the fingers whose fault it is. And you cannot do it with the chainsaw either. So I'm saying it's not the fault of the bureaucrats. In a free society, everybody has a right to find a job, whatever the job openings are. It's the system. The system we have to change. Our politicians are trapped in the systems, because the politics is whoever brings forward something new, any politician or party, they won't win because you could criticize them. So this is the problem. Politics, government can't fix things. So it needs a private citizen. It needs a coalition of what I would call concerned Canadians, where you could leave the program relative short, that you could combine. This is what we need to get the economy going. Because the economy, I think it's frightening what will happen over the next 5-10 years. We don't make things anymore. When you see factories, the factories are all warehouses. We don't make things. And when a country doesn't make things, they got to import everything. That is where the economy breaks down, and where there's no jobs, where people go hungry. So we got to avoid that. So I think I've given you a bit of a short overview, and I would be very happy to answer questions and how can we fix things.
Okay, so I would like to know, first of all, what skills you brought to Canada with you, and how long it took you to acquire those skills, say on the tool and die maker side. And then also, what attitude you think you brought to bear to your work that enticed the first person, for example, to offer you a partnership, but that also made you capable of taking the risk and developing the vision to rent that first empty garage. So how were you trained? How long did that take? What made you a good potential partner, and why did you have enough daring, let's say, or vision to rent that first garage?
Well, the training, I served high school. It was only 8 classes. And I proposed to in Canada, high school should end at grade 10, grade 11, and grade 12. Students should focus, we should teach them trades. And that doesn't mean that the students after grade 12 couldn't go to university. I'm just now telling people the situation I was exposed to. So it was a 3.5-year program. We had 1 or 2 days where we had theoretical stuff where we had to be in classrooms, and let's say 4 days we were in the workshop on the floor learning different things. So that was the program.
What did you learn? What skills did you acquire?
Tool making is sort of for every. You need, let's say. Let's take this pen here. That's not made by hand. There's so much precision, so much knowledge goes in a writing pen. The ink's got to come out for the next few months. It's such a minute that you can read and write. So you got to make machines or tools, or people may understand, well, let's say a bumper for a car is not made by hand, okay? You need a mold because it's plastic, right? And it's, so this is what tool making is about, right? And this is maybe the most important trade to get things done, to get things made, right? When you take a car, might it be a door, might it be a seat, might it be the bumper, right? You need tools, you need dies, and then special machinery. So that will, call it the basics, would take 3 to 4 years. And then it might take another few years till you slowly work yourself up that you be a qualified tool and die maker.
We're facing the threat of a government shutdown later this month, and yet again, the administration will ultimately deal with it the same way they always do. For no money.
Training, and you also mentioned earlier.
9-8.
And so, what machines did you learn to operate when you were doing your training? And you also mentioned earlier that you were confident in putting yourself forward as a good problem solver. And so what was the relationship between learning those machines? What machines did you learn? And
I needed a platform because I couldn't quite reach up, right? I was 14 years of age. I couldn't reach up. There was a vice grip mounted on the thing here. And then there was a piece of steel. The piece of steel was about 4 inches square. Okay, we took 2 people to lift that steel up on the vice grip, and then we had a hacksaw, a metal hacksaw. We had to cut the piece down 4 inches square, and that took maybe a week. Okay, till we cut the thing down, and then it took maybe about 3-4 weeks. We had to file it perfectly square. So that, it's an amazing thing what that leads to and how you accumulate the precision work, right? I did a similar school in Canada where we had a school here to teach young kids how to be tool and die makers, right? But anyway, so you go and then we learn things on a lathe where you make round things or a milling machine, and later on precision computerized machines, etc., etc. So you go to a stage, right? Okay. So anyway, that's what I did. My first job then in Toronto as a tool and die maker. We made stampede die, right? We did to maybe punch out a piece of metal and with some holes in it, and so that's basically what the tool and die maker does. And as you go along, it gets more and more sophisticated.
Right. So you got familiarized with a wide variety of tools and the ability to make precision parts. Now, you said you also became a good problem solver, and then you also developed this idea that you could rent your own garage and start producing your own tools. Now, one of the things you said was that when you went out to sell your services, you told your potential customers that you could solve a problem, and if you didn't, they didn't have to pay you. And the reason I want to focus on that in part is because I want to know how you developed the vision to rent that garage to begin with, but also how you knew that the proper thing to sell to potential customers was your service as a problem solver, right? Because what you're saying to them essentially is, well, you guys have a problem and it's plaguing you and you need it solved, and I'm the guy that can solve it, and I'm willing to, demonstrate my capabilities, which is really an excellent approach to sales, because you want to find out what the person's problem is and you want to be the solution. But how did you develop that problem solving ability and your confidence in it? And then why did you think it was worth taking the risk to rent that first garage?
Jordan, you ask great questions. Those have to be answered. The reason why I'm sitting here is, look, I want to roll off the experience I accumulated. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of young Canadians out there which could do the same thing if we teach them the basics, right? And I think a society would be much better off with thousands of smaller companies than one or two large companies, right? That's the idea. So anyway, so I opened up that factory. I could solve a few problems. I got some orders, and I like I said, after 2 years, I had about 20 people, and I noticed my foreman was a little different, right? Because when you work so closely together, his name was Herman. I said, Herman, what's the matter with you lately? Well, he said, Frank, I'm thinking of opening my own factory. I said, I sympathize with that. That's what I did too. I said, look, why don't we talk tomorrow? Maybe we can find a better solution. That evening I was talking to myself, and I said to myself, if that foreman's going to leave me, that would stifle my growth. I didn't like that. The next reason was, if that foreman's going to leave me, I got to do all the work myself. I liked it even less. The third reason was, if I hire a new foreman and I don't show him how to run a business, I still got to do all the work. And if I hire a new foreman and I show him how business is run, it's just a question of time before he goes out and opens up his new factory. I think the key is we need those experience. There is this huge potential, right? This huge energy which lies dormant in people. We have to teach them the right way. So I think it's important, while I'm still have everything in my mind quite clearly, that we record that. And it's great that your skill is to ask the right question: how come and how what, right? Okay, so I'm delighted to sit here.
Well, so you grew very rapidly. So there's two mysteries there to me, because one of the things I've noticed with small businesses, for example, is that it's very difficult to get your first customers, right? It's very difficult to get from 0 to 1. Once you have a customer or two, the next customers start to be easier because you can refer them to other customers you have. But getting those first people to decide that you're the person when no one else has done it, or has been willing to show that faith, that can be very tricky. So what do you think you managed successfully how do you think you managed to present yourself successfully to the first people that you offered your services to?
Well, price and quality, does it function, right? And if you have a lot of knowledge and you transmit that knowledge to other people, then you can give a great service, better pricing, better functioning machinery, better tools. So that's the very key, and that's what I would like to transmit. So fortunately, around that time, that's why I'm always saying life is a question of fate and circumstances, being at the right place at the right time. Around in the early 60s, there was a free trade arrangement signed with the United States. And I see this huge potential out there. I should say I didn't finish up when I talked the next day with my foreman, where I said to him, look, why don't we open up a new factory? You own a third. And I said, no more overtime. I own 2/3. And by the end of the year, we take pro rata some monies out and we leave some monies in for expansions. He said, do you mean it? I said, yes. We went right away to a lawyer and signed the thing here, and the guy hustled like crazy. He spent more time in there. That was his factory. Basically, I took the next foreman, the next foreman, the next foreman, the next foreman. I said, business is easy, right? And then when I had I think it was about 6 or 7 factories, and the free trade arrangement came into the being, I saw this enormous potential up there. Up to that now, I only shared with the foreman. I said, and then I got to know the United States better, Canada better, the power of the unions, the size of the unions. And I said, if I would have to do certain things to be competitive. So I had a friend of mine, machinery dealer, and he said, I kind of explained to him, I really should go public because I want to have the workers also participate. Well, he says, I know a fellow, which his name is, I'll remember the name. It's immaterial, but anyway, he gave me the name. I met him at the ski hill. We went skiing together up at George Beeks, and he said, "Look, that was Magna Electronics." Okay, he said, "I have a certain age. I would like to retire. Why don't you sell your companies in Magna Electronics and you have close to control, and then you could put that program in that where you can share the profits with workers." So that's what I finally did. That I was totally green when it comes down to public company, right? I did not have total control. I had a board there, right? And they were more in driving the stock up, right? And the defense industry was very, they were mainly, Magna Electronics did mainly defense work, right? And that was very popular. And I was in automotive, and I said, after a year or so, I said, I don't think this makes a lot of, I said, I want to be out, okay? And I said, I sell my stock on the market. So they pleaded with me, please sell the stock to us. And I said, fine, no problem. And give us a year time. And I said, fine. They were basically okay, guys. But the market kind of went down. The shares dipped. They didn't have the monies. I never sued anybody. And I just said, look, under the circumstances, you guys can't be on the board. And then I put in different directors, and after a while, I went to the board and went to the public and say I forgo about 25% of my stocks if you, the shareholders, vote for multiple vote. Because I came to the conclusion, I want to run things, and I can't have 20 guys or 50 guys left and right discussing, debating forever, right? So the shareholders voted for that. Then I said, in return, I also give your thing a certain discipline. This is where I put the corporate constitution in. That if I had control, I only could take out so much. There was clear-cut control what management could do. And that sort of became the Magna environment.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, let's go back to your foreman. So you had said that when you made that arrangement with him, that you valued his work and you wanted him around, and you were concerned that if he left, well, all of that work would fall on your shoulders again and also stop you from moving ahead. And you sat down and contemplated what sort of deal you would have to make with him in order for his needs to be met and yours. And there's something very important there about the nature of a deal. You know, people often think that with a deal you try to win, or with a deal you try to compromise. But my sense with a proper negotiation is that you want to figure out what you want so that you're thrilled to progress with the deal, and you want to figure out what your partner wants so he's thrilled to progress with the deal. Because if you set it up that way, then your interests are aligned and you're both going to work as hard as you can autonomously. Now, you knew your foreman had the same kind of entrepreneurial vision you did, and you wanted to unleash his abilities. And so you offered him a third of the company. You said you'd take 2/3, and then you said he was thrilled, which is a good thing to have happen in a partner. And he went off and treated this factory like it was his own, partly because it was. Now, and then you said you duplicated that subsidiary structure across 6 factories and then expanded much more dramatically. And you also, at that point, also noted that that principle of distributed ownership should be brought down to the workers. So you were starting to develop that as an explicit philosophy. Now, why do you think it was that you realized that your foreman needed ownership? Why do you think you were willing to grant it to him? And why do you think that the agreement that you made, which was that you would own 1/3 of the, or that he would own 1/3 of the company and you would own 2/3, why do you think that was a desirable and compelling motivational arrangement for your foreman?
First of all, a deal, you got to be a deal for both sides. It's got to be good, right? And as a company grows, circumstances might change a bit, etc., etc. So you make provisions if you can. The reason why I think he was delighted with the deal is when we had verbal arrangements, I never went back on my word. I think that's a very key, right? So he felt comfortable when they say we take out 1/3, right? We take out a portion in a pro rata. So he felt kind of comfortable, right? That's very crucial. Like later on, if once when they had about 30 or 40 or 50 or 100 factories, and I had a prospective manager, which I interviewed, I said, look, there's the name, the addresses of 100 factories. Pick whoever manager you want to choose and ask him how I run things. Okay? The message what I wanted to get across, if you promise something, you must keep it. Doesn't matter what the thing is. Because if you got the ability, you can always make monies. If you lose your reputation, you can never repair it. So I think I had a reputation built up. And again, when I said small companies, you don't need a formal structure. It's kind of loose. It's pure free enterprise. Like when I was small, when I had about 20, 30, or 40 workers, I showed you my bank book and said, look, this is our contract we have here. If you do X, I share it with you, right? So you don't, it's pure free enterprise. And that's what I want to get across. That's pure capitalism. But capitalism, if we don't change, if we do not let workers participate, capitalistic, the system is self-destructive. And let me give you a quick story, right? I spent a lot of time in Washington. At one time, I had a meeting with the leader of the House, Mitch McConnell. He's the senator from Kentucky. He was the president of the Senate. I had a farm in Kentucky, so I knew him. So I said, Mitch, let's, I'd like to see you one of these days. So we arranged, I met him, and I said, Mitch, America did great via the free enterprise system. And without free enterprise, there's no free society. So we must do everything we can to have free enterprise. But I said free enterprise got a major problem. So he said, what do you mean by that? I said, Mitch, more and more capital is held by fewer and fewer. And I said, in nature, when a species does not reproduce itself, another species will take over. And the laws of nature are much stronger than any man-made law, right? And that's what happens now. That's the way we're gonna go. So we gotta share with the employees, because without employees, we can't make a profit. And if employees make more money, they have more purchasing power. The economy functions better. Okay, so we must have the large companies. They must have more of a discipline, because sometimes they run by institutions, and they have got no more affinity for people. That they just look at the share price, they look at the profits. So it's not there, right? So the owners are not there anymore. So anyway, we need a discipline there, but we must open up. We must. It's so crucial that small enterprise, that we don't tie them up in chains and with regulations.
The Bible is the root of all wisdom, inspiration, and spiritual nourishment. Power of
Three things. The first thing you highlighted was
free trial of all 10,000 plus prayers and meditations.
okay. Now you highlighted three things. The first thing you highlighted was that the people that you were negotiating could trust you. Now, people who are cynically critical of capitalism tend to justify that by noting the sort of winner-take-all problem that you described. And then they presume that if you're greedy and you shovel everything towards yourself, you're most likely to, let's say, win in the capitalist enterprise. But you pointed out something very much contrary to that. Three things, actually. The first is that you don't develop a reputation by screwing other people. You develop a reputation by telling other people what you're going to do and then bloody well doing it. And that you should also write down what you say you're going to do so that everybody remembers and knows exactly what the deal is. That you said that by the time you were negotiating, let's say with a foreman who wanted to leave, you had enough track record with him of trust so that he believed that you would do what you said you were going to do, and he could envision a future with you without having to worry about your motivations. So you established your trust. Then you also realized that he was going to be a hell of a lot more motivated if he was an owner in the system, right? And so your answer to the problem of capitalism isn't exactly less capitalism. It's a much more distributed and generous form of capitalism that pulls everybody, the workers and the managers and owners, into the profit-making structure. Now the other advantage, this is so cool, because I've learned this as I've built enterprises too. If you make a really great deal with someone and the person's good and they're competent and they're honest and they're productive and they're generous, if you make a really good deal with them and you can let them go off on their own, that means that they're going to take care of 1,000 details on their own, keeping their own affairs in order that you don't have to take care of anymore. You don't have to micromanage. And that means that you can go off and, expand your enterprise and do your own thing. And so the advantage you gain by distributing more responsibility, let's say to an extremely competent foreman, the advantage you gain is massive freedom. And you also gain the advantage of the fact that that foreman who now partakes in the enterprise is going to be much more motivated to make the enterprise work. And so even if you end up paying him more, like a third of the company, let's say, or the profit share that you described, the overall profit is going to be so much greater that there's nothing in it but benefit for you and for him. And then you also pointed out, and this is a very crucial thing for people to understand, because this is where the left-wing critics of capitalism actually have a point, although it's not a problem that's specific to capitalism, which is that as an enterprise grows, and it doesn't matter what the enterprise is, the benefits tend to flow into the hands of fewer and fewer people. And that destabilizes the whole damn enterprise, because you get too many slaves on the bottom and not enough pharaohs on the top. And that produces discontent and dissatisfaction and amotivation, and that can bring the whole damn system to a halt. So your your solution to that was to set up this constitution that you described, which also enabled you to grow. I'm going to review it again because it's very, very important. This is the Economic Charter of Rights. So your management philosophy is to distribute responsibility and profit, and to make that an explicit part of the agreement. And the deal is 20% of the profits go to the shareholders, 6% to the management, 10% to the workers, 2% to charity, 7% reinvested in research and further development. And you make that explicit. Now, the trust you described is also crucial because the workers with whom you're arranging to share the profits aren't going to trust that deal or go along with it if they think you're going to gerrymander the books on the profit side, right? They actually have to believe that you're going to play a straight game. But if you can explain to them that, well, you're going to play a straight game because if you motivate them properly, they're going to work a hell of a lot harder and everybody's going to make a lot more money and the products are going to have higher quality and we're going to sell more, then there's absolutely nothing there for people to, steal selfishly and run away with. There's only the possibility that all that distributed responsibility and ability is going to produce more and more. Well, it's going to be more and more productive and more generous. Now, I asked you when we met at the restaurant a couple of months ago whether or not you had run into labor problems as you grew, because going from no employees to 100,000, you're obviously going to be dealing with potential labor issues. And you said that as a consequence of this constitution and the trustworthiness of the process that you've been able to pay your workers a premium rate, but that you've also had almost no labor trouble. Is that correct? Have I got that right?
Yeah, that is correct. And the interesting part about it is we were basically in the automobile industry, and the Auto Workers Union was maybe the strongest union in America, right? Okay, so anyway, the president of the Canadian Auto Workers Union, his name was Buzz Hargrove, or still is his name. And I called him and I said, Buzz, let's have lunch. The two of us, we have an obligation. What are we going to do to maintain jobs and create new jobs?
we're gonna stop right there, people, and we will continue tomorrow. Peace out. Yeah. Video. Peace out. Fights. Flashlights. No, that's not all. This took too long, bruh. This took too long. What? Wait. fine. I'll delete something like I don't know. Delete. Oh. Don't play that.